comedy is like about telling truths, right? And if certain kind of patterns and archetypes in society are just kind of completely impossible to talk about or even mention, then it's not going to be. It might be like approved comedy, but it's just not going to be very interesting. It's not going to like target like the sense of relief you get for comedy when someone tells a joke which you're kind of all thinking.
Welcome to the New Flesh Podcast, the podcast you deserve. My name is Ricky Allpike, and joining me once again is Jonathan Astro. John, we have a return guest. Mr. Ed West is in the house. I'm pretty excited because we're going to talk about another sitcom, Blackadder.
Yeah, well, we covered a few different things, but UK politics, woke James Bond, and the sitcom Blackadder. I think people should listen because we do need to get back to talking about, well, enjoying comedy. I think is what we should be doing, but I think before we can start enjoying, we need to figure out what's gone wrong, why we're not allowed to joke anymore. Why we're not allowed to, have good things anymore. And so maybe after that we can start making Blackadder again.
Yeah, Blackadder 5.
Well, they shouldn't do it. It'd be dreadful. But
it would, yeah.
We're just going to have to
what era would they set it in? Would it be like the swinging 60s?
Yeah, maybe, I guess. But it's funny. The funniest stuff is happening now, really. Like all this woke stuff is hilarious, but no one's got the guts to cover any of it.
Should be Blackadder set in like a transgender clinic or something.
Yeah, that'd be a laugh a riot. It's me. All right, well, let's get into this thing.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we need your help. We need you to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to the show. We're also on YouTube, so please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment there. Word of mouth is also a very powerful tool, so please tell all of your friends. And finally, to our Uber fans, if you love what we do, you can send us a little cash via the Buy Me a Coffee platform. Any donation here is very much appreciated. And now, here's Ed West.
Return guest Ed West is former deputy editor of UnHerd, a journalist, essayist, author, and substacker. He began his career in men's magazines and then transitioned into less racy journalism. He's written for the Daily Telegraph and the Spectator and has authored books on a diverse array of topics, from the art of seduction to British history. His most recent book, which we covered in our last podcast with him, Tory Boy, Memoirs of the Last Conservative, is hilarious and you should get it. We also want you to sign up to his Substack called The Wrong Side of History. It is unique and fantastic. Ed, welcome back to the New Flesh.
It's a pleasure. It's a lovely sunny day in England. Not often you can say that. Hope you guys are well.
Yes, we are very well. Now, we jump around a bit today. We've got a few things to cover.
Transition, by the way, very, very interesting use term there to describe my career. But yeah, thank you. Yes.
Goodness me. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, because I got this from some of your writing recently. How's your French coming along? I hear you've got a bit of a psychodrama going on with learning of French.
Yeah, big mental block. I've just come back from France. Actually, we were in this. I love the country, even though we had a couple of customer service experiences. They just don't do customer service. It's just like it's their way or sod off. And so we were in the very southwest for a bit, near the Spanish border. In fact, we went to Spain for the day. And there we went to this lovely local restaurant. But my daughters are vegetarians, and trying to order vegetarian food in a lot of the Latin world is just treated like a mental illness. And they just couldn't understand. So the beef I got this lovely steak. It's amazing. But they brought back these poached eggs for my kids, and it was like an hour. And then they had sausage in them, and we said, like, they're vegetarians. And like one of our friends was a very good French speaker, so they understood fluently. And then eventually, 2 hours later, the food it hadn't all probably arrived. They didn't even say, oh, well, if you're like with Americans especially, it's like if there's any problem with the order, they'll like take off half the bill, or they might even get you the whole rest meal free. They're so it's all about customers. Yeah. They just said no. Said no, absolutely not. Said you're paying for the whole thing, and it ended with the chef picking up our phone and threatening to call the police if we didn't pay the full amount. Right? It's like that is the French all over, isn't it? And we had a couple of others, but generally, for being, the idea. Obviously, the Parisians are very rude. Everyone knows that. But you still get a bit. I think in country areas, they're just set in their own ways, which I kind of love. I kind of love the country, and we're probably going back there in half term actually. Because hopefully, yeah, so but I had this mental block because it's just about the pronouncing as an English speaker. Just pronouncing the French words very nasal, and you have to pull lots of like funny faces to speak French and make kind of unnatural shapes in your mouth, and it just feels.
Do you really go for it? Like you can't do it. It's worse when you don't. Because when you do an accent, you've really got to be French West. You can't just do parlez-vous français. You can't just do that.
No, you can't do it sound like Teddy. You've got to really become the Frenchman. You really have to absorb the character. I'm getting a bit better at it generally because learning languages is quite hard. I'm generally quite shy. So a lot of the language thing is just shyness, and like you're going to be laughed at all the time for a while before you get to a certain proficiency. But as I get old, generally as you get older, you just like don't really care what people think about you anymore.
That's true.
So it's like less embarrassing. But yeah, it's there's a kind of generation that gets harder because France is like one of the last countries in Western Europe where you will still meet a lot of people who can't speak English.
Wow.
Like Germany is just impossible. Everyone speaks English. And obviously the Netherlands, they've been speaking English. I mean, obviously, if in Holland, it's even embarrassing just to say, like, is it Sprixy English? Because it's a bit insulting, isn't it? It's like, are you an idiot? You can't speak English.
Well, the Dutch is so good. The Dutch are so good at English that they can do puns and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They can like do wordplay and sort of stuff. Yeah. And the Scandinavians are similar to that. So, but in France, there are lots of rural areas. We stayed on a way near Lyon with this kind of older middle-aged couple, and they didn't speak. And the woman just chatting away at us. And I was I got most of what she's saying, but I need to spend some time there. So if I can get the Substack subscriptions up to like good levels, then I can go and like live in a castle in France and become a Frenchman.
We want to help make your dreams come true. So everyone sign up right now and put Ed in France where he belongs.
How do your kids feel about that moving to France? Were they traumatized by the vegetarian thing?
I kind of prepared them for it. I kind of give them a lot of, I tell them about, foreigners, you've got to be got to be aware of these people. So I think, I don't think they mind really. It was just like a beautiful evening, like just, amazing views. And it was all just, it was all nice generally. So they laughed it off, gave them ice cream instead.
But what is the antagonism with the French and the English though? Because there's something so archetypal about because you're an English public intellectual, and there's a big tradition of sort of English public intellectuals being enamored by France and being hating it and loving it all at the same time.
It's I don't know. A lot of people said that in France, hostilities got even worse since Brexit, but I don't know how to. Like, a lot of people have said they've experienced more rudeness, but I'm not entirely sure. But I just think it's always been like that, especially amongst like non-elites in both countries. Always been quite hostile to the other one. So apparently, when the First World War broke out in like Brittany, there were like cheers and public celebrations, and everyone thought that we were the French. They were fighting the English. It's like, hey. And then they said, "Oh, we're fighting the English side." It's like, what? But I mean, that kind of obviously amongst the English, I suppose. English working class, or at least the non-aristocracy, they've always been much more. Like French is considered like posh and fancy, and the kind of innate hostility which there isn't even to the Germans really. Obviously hostility to the Germans like peaked a little bit in the early 20th century, but. And even people said that about the First World War in the trenches. They came back. The English soldiers, British soldiers came back much more hostile to the French than the Germans. I don't know how true that is, but there is I just think because it's so close physically, but there are two countries that are very culturally different in so many ways. It's quite jarring to them to be so close. But there is a love there as well. There is a genuine on both sides. I think huge. I admire. They bring things to the table in Europe that other countries don't, and I kind of admire their sense of their kind of nationalism is quite a relief compared to England and Germany, we're so sort of cowed and pathetic about everything. Obviously we know why the Germans are now cowed and pathetic, and probably good reasons for that. But yeah,
they're in the sin bin for a little bit longer, but eventually they might.
We've got a few more years in the sin bin before everyone forgets, that business. But the French still like make stuff. They're still kind of proud of they can build stuff. They like worry about energy security. they consider that their job in civil service is to promote French interests, which I don't think the British civil service are that keen on. And I think it's kind of admirable. But also, it's a beautiful language, and the history there is just, the amount of history that's there. I mean, even England's quite recent in comparison, really.
Well, we might change gears here. We're keen to chat about the state of politics in the UK, as well as the British sitcom Blackadder, which you penned an article about recently. John and I, we're big Blackadder fans. And we also need to get your thoughts on the new woke James Bond. But before we do, I'd like to talk about Queen Elizabeth briefly. By the time this episode airs, we would have had the first anniversary of her passing. And I wanted to get your thoughts on her reign as Queen and on the British monarchy in general. Do you think her passing marks a turning point in British culture?
I think her funeral was a big event, seemed to represent a country that's sort of like in decline, or a country that's transitioned, to use that word again. It was it was a brilliant event. It was really very well done. But it was also, I can't imagine when Charles dies and when William has his coronation, it's going to be anything like it. It was a sort of passing of an old country. I must have written this, but during their reign, 1952 to 2022, everything in the country is transformed in every possible way. There's been a complete religious, demographic, moral revolution that whole time. The country is completely unrecognizable. I mean, there's no monarch in history, I think, who has ever presided over that amount of change. And yet she was a completely passive observer, really, of events. Didn't really influence them in any way. And I think I presume Charles will live another 30 years because the royal family, being part lizards, obviously have these very good longevity. And his father lived to 99, so hopefully he'll be with us a long time. But I just can't imagine that it'll be the same kind of country when Charles passed away. So it's it was the 8th of September, wasn't it? Is that right? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, her apolitical posture in public life, which you mentioned, I personally yearn for this. I'm sick of being lectured to by rich sporting stars, actors, or other elites. Do you think that King Charles and Prince William and the others are going to follow her example, or are they going to? I know Charles sort of would weigh in on climate change stuff and if you sort of dip his toe into sort of woke issues, but do you think they're going to simmer that down and follow her lead?
I think Charles has been pretty quiet, hasn't he, since become king? I think that was the understanding. I mean, I think on architecture, I agree with him. So, but I understand that, it's still probably a bad idea for the monarch to speak about something, even if he agrees with me. And I think William seems pretty smart, and his wife's pretty smart. So I think he probably understands that's the way to do it. I mean, obviously, the big thorn in the side is like the Harry issue and the Harry and Meghan melodrama, and being a constant kind of source of conflict with the family.
That seems to have simmered down a bit, though. I haven't heard much from those two for a little while.
Yeah, maybe it's all. Maybe it's all got better. I don't know. Maybe they've come to agreement. I just don't really see how it's not going to continue to be a running sore. If she, she's obviously incentivized to kind of attack the royal family, and for whatever reason, she feels that she, hasn't been treated in the correct way. Even though most people in Britain, I think even the Americans have turned against her apparently in polls, haven't they? But it's all it's obviously sad. Like the father and son thing is there's comparison made to Prince Andrew, but the Harry thing is obviously more damaging to the royal family because the Prince Andrew thing is okay. The prince is like a bit of a sweaty perv, but he's done his thing. And he can be punished for it, but it's not like an ongoing family row, which is more damaging to any kind of authority. I'm still generally, I think the royal family are probably going to survive a long time. There's no alternative. There's no you can't point to any politician or anyone in Britain you think I'd rather they were running the country. It's just faith in democratic politics is declined more than the kind of confidence in the royal family. So they're basically they're basically going to be there forever, I think.
Yeah, so you don't think there's much support for a Republican movement in the UK?
I mean, it's 20-25%, but it's been like that for 50 or 60 years. If you look at, most social issues have become kind of steadily more liberal, progressive over the last 50 years. Sometimes it accelerated, especially in the last 10 years. But the royal family have just kind of stuck. at the same point. I mean, even people who aren't particularly mad about them kind of see that they are the sort of least of what bad alternatives. And if you're on the centre left, the Royals actually have kind of quite good centre left outcomes. I mean, they tend to be a sort of like a focus for sort of otherwise right wing energies, which could become actually more aggressive, or they tend to be kind of like social democratic and like soft leftish. And I mean, the only argument against the royal family is I just think it's a bit cruel to them. The whole thing, the whole kind of Truman Show bubble, is to raise people like that seems to me, like a bit cruel. But there's no actual like political arguments against it. The idea is that I was grown up, I can never be head of state. It's like, so what? Who wants to be head of state? Like, it's just that's mental. I mean, I assume it. I mean, people have always assumed Australia would become republic, but it doesn't seem to be. I don't know. That doesn't seem to be much.
We had a disastrous referendum on this 20 years ago. Basically, the way you nail people in a referendum here is you have a really complicated and dumb question, and then people just get in there and say, "I don't understand this," and so then that was that. But there's like, there's not much of an appetite for it, now.
Just hassle. I mean, the obvious thing would be like to have Australia could have its own branch of the House of Windsor. So you have a separate monarch who goes and lives in Australia. I mean, you could have Harry. I mean, like, that'd be amazing.
I think we could convert Harry. I think like the problem is, like, we're not as rugged as people think we are, but we could unpussify him a little bit. I think
when you see pictures of him, there's a recent picture of him at the Beyonce concert, and like these tickets are gold dust, and he just looks so miserable, so crushed. He looks like he just. And when you look at the pictures in the old days, when he's like in
Afghanistan,
running around, just having a great time, absolutely.
He so now like he's just a hero then, and he's just ruined it by shacking up with this, as we know, this woman that I'm clearly attracted to. So,
you hate her.
Well, this could be a good transition point. There's that word again. God damn it. They've ruined that word, Segue.
That'll be the title of this episode.
Yeah, but like that, maybe they should call it a sex segue from now on. So, from the Royals, there's a new novel out called On His Majesty's Secret Service, written by one Charlie Higson, who is one of the co-creators of, I'm going to say, literally one of the greatest shows ever made in the history of the television, The Far Show, by Paul Whitehouse and Charlie Higson. Now, in a piece that you've written about this book that he's written, so Charlie's written a couple of young Bond novels, and that was his apprenticeship, and he's written this adult one now. And but the first thing you mentioned in your piece is that you've actually met Charlie Higson, which I was amazed by.
Yeah, well, I interviewed him like years ago. must have been 24. So, but this was back when I worked for Nuts. This was that Gentleman's Interest magazine, which I sort of started out my transition. And I just interviewed.
What a bold title! What a bold title!
Yes,
no. Think about that, Ed.
It's really. I'd like to write about it more extensively once, just because the culture at the time, like the 90s and noughties, like the peak raunchiness of the sexual revolution, and all revolutions go from these like libertarian anarchic phrases to the kind of authoritarian stage when like the Stalin takes over. It happens all the time, and that's happened now. And just the norms of what was acceptable are just so unthinkable today. I mean, people got away with a lot. Anyway, so I had to call. He was a screenwriter for a film, so I called him up. Anyway, the thing failed, and it was like really stressful for journalists because you can be in big trouble. So you absolutely fucked it up. And but then I called him back, said, "Oh, I'm sorry, this has never happened to me before," and he like laughed, and then he said, "Yeah, we did the whole thing." So I just thought, what a lovely guy. Sometimes you do, because a lot of celebrities are pricks, but then sometimes you speak to and meet some, and they're really actually really nice. And but anyway, so I felt. So cut a long story short, a reader or an acquaintance I know sent me like the pictures of the new Bond book he'd written, which came out a few months ago, but it hasn't really picked up on. And I tweeted the pictures, and I thought, okay, because like the new Bond, he's like a very like centrist kind of centre left type. and he had the kind of Bond narratives about how he thinks like right wing populism is terrible, and that the villain is kind of like a Nigel Farage character who's sort of he's and at one point they say, oh well, in his organization Bond was shocked because they didn't even have like 50-50 representation between men and women. There wasn't even diversity. Like
oh, come on.
It's like this is just not like James Bond, right? But
James Bond doesn't give a shit about that.
I just can't see him. I don't know. And anyway, so the tweet got like much, and I actually like locked my account and thought I feel a bit bad about him now because everyone's just like saying blah blah, attacking him, and it got like a million page views over it. And so I deleted it, and then that made it worse because lots of people like piled in and attacked me and said don't be such a pussy cuck weakling, Ed. He deserves. What's that?
I was going to say that you would have got accused of being just a royal cuck for getting rid of it.
Massive cuck. And so then I just saw the timeline. He would spend his whole day arguing with like these really like small Twitter accounts, like Wessex Groiper or something, like arguing about it, saying, "It's like, wait, mate, just it's time you got your coat." And so anyway, I wrote about it. I thought it's fine. And now I think everyone's now tweeting extracts from this book, and I think the Spectator did a really good piece about it, and I think other publications now going to do it. But I mean, it is kind of funny, just because it just seems like this is not what sort of James Bond. I mean, but his argument, man, well, I kind of agree with that. So if you are a public school educated man, the 35 who works at the Foreign Office, you probably are quite progressive and lefty now, because those are kind of in England. If you're posh, and I mean, maybe if you're a train killer, you wouldn't be. But
I was going to say, is this the guy? This is we're talking about a guy with a license to kill here, who is a an anti-hero, doing it for king and country. He uses people, he lies. He's kind of a bad guy, and we like him for that.
He's a pussy hound.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I don't know if he still is a pussy hound in the new book. I imagine you don't want Bond to get Me Too, do you? That'd be awful.
Well, no, in the new movie, which you mentioned, what is it, No Time to Die, he mainly spent his time having deep and meaningful conversations with women who were fully dressed, like way up to like mumsy-looking women, and they just sat around talking about their relationship.
So it's such a bore. I don't want to like spoilers, but I was really glad. I was almost like cheering in the cinema when he dies.
Yeah.
And I thought finally he got his shit out of his misery. And the only way now, presumably, I thought, would be like you to have a sort of 60s era Bond as a kind of historical piece, because that's the only way you can make him interesting, because he's not allowed to sort of be that character anymore. But apparently they are making a new one. I just think that, I mean, I don't know. I thought so. Okay, when it goes out of publication, when it goes out of copyright, I'm going to write my own one where George Soros is the villain. But I thought another angle was, considering how common autogynephilia is in the military and amongst spies, like that would be actually a big one where Bond transitions, but he's still a completely like cold killer, and he's like, I'm not sure they would make that into a movie, but you never know.
I don't get.
You never know.
Because we quite like Bond, and we've got it in the right. We don't go to conventions or anything, but it's an enjoyable fantasy, and I just don't understand why. Like, what the hell? I mean, you're not inside Charlie Higson's head, but what the hell is this guy thinking? Like, he's meant to be.
He's misread his audience.
But they do that. They do misread the audience.
Is it misreading? I don't know. I bet there's loads of people who. I mean, I bet it's selling quite well, and I bet. Like the rest, the number of people in Britain who listen to The Rest Is Politics, which I can, Alistair Campbell, and this kind of upper normie, centrist, centre-left politics. This is kind of very widespread now. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would like a Bond who's sort of going around chasing Nigel Farage. I mean,
I want a Bond. I always liked the Bond, but whenever but also aren't the villains meant to be? We don't have to go into it too much, but it's always really interesting when they pick a villain who is, even the ones that are a bit on the nose, like Tomorrow Never Dies, which is from the 90s, and the bad guys like a Murdoch style, like media magnate or something. Like even that's at least attempting to look beyond what's going on in front of us. Like, shouldn't the bad guy now not be Nigel Farage, but really, someone who's trying to pit left and right against each other, some corporate elite, some BlackRock type figure or something, or
Yeah, I mean that'd be no. isn't it? I don't know. I mean, it's just a bit of fun. I mean, I was a massive fan of the films when I was younger. I mean, I
What's
suppose
your
everyone
favourite
was,
one?
isn't it?
Come on.
I've got a very soft spot for The Spy Who Loved Me. I'm very much Roger Moore era. I mean, I can.
Yes, me too. Me too.
But also, Barbara Bach was just amazingly beautiful, and just the sexy Russian woman who you never know if she was going to kiss you or just shoot you. I mean, it's just can't beat
But
it.
you're not. See, you've already dated yourself because you're not allowed to talk about beautiful women and sexy. Like if you said, oh, "I saw the new James Bond," oh, there was so much sexy parts in it. I really liked. Like people would they would be outraged. Say, what you mean is that the woman the woman of color who took over as 007. What you mean is that she was fucking amazing. Is what you meant to say, right? And you said, "Oh yeah, that's what I meant."
Yeah. Just leave me alone. Whatever. One of my
Don't cancel me.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, we live in a much more, I guess, a much less tolerant society than we were 40 years ago in some ways, and the sort of the longhouse culture is not a good place for bonds. I don't know. Maybe with this will just become a sort of, I don't know. Maybe they will come back. Maybe.
Ed, we don't have to put up with it though. Like we can move on from Bod in a sec, but because I went to see it with my wife, and my wife she is equally as dumbfounded and outraged, and she's like a career woman and the rest of it. But she watches these movies and she goes, "Who is this for?" Like she goes, "I want to see." A woman in a backless dress, and I want that fantasy. It's a particular kind of like aggressive, male fantasy that I guess leverages a little bit of complicity from a certain type of, average woman or something, and yet. It's what you end up watching is like just this a corporate video, which is equally sort of self-flagellating and disappointed in itself, and also not pleasing anyone. There's no man or seemingly any woman who wants to go to these Bond movies or anything and anymore. We sort of do it out of obligation, and we go, oh geez, I wish this was The Spy Who Loved Me, where it was like entendres and sexy women and karate chops to the neck and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it could only really be done ironically, couldn't it? That's why I think has a period piece. You could get away with it because you could sort of pretend to. You could pretend to be saying, "Oh, this is outrageous. This is what people were like in the 60s and 70s," while really going, "Yeah, this is great. I really wish, I wish that was me." I don't know. Who knows? Yeah, who knows? It is sad, but
All right. Well, we'll move on to British comedy because this is what we initially wanted to get you to talk on. We'll move on to Blackadder in a second, but maybe just thinking broad, in terms of the comedy, culture and comedy. For our money, British comedy is the gold standard. That is the gold standard of comedy. I meet people who say, "Oh, what about The American Office or something?" And usually that's a sign for me to not listen to their opinions anymore. If I need to tell you why the UK Office is the real quiz, then we got a problem. So, what do you think the secret is to British comedy?
That's a good point. I mean, it's presumably it's very cultural because the Americans did produce stuff like The Simpsons, so I don't think anything is as good as The Simpsons really. Any TV show, probably ever. Well, maybe not, but in terms of comedy, it's very culturally specific, isn't it? I mean, Australia is much kind of culturally similar to Britain than it is to America. So presumably, for that reason, British comedies, and they're just there are lots of Brits in Australia proportionally compared to America, aren't there? So I guess it translates better. But, I've written before in the past about. I think I think it's very hard to quantify, isn't it? Because everyone thinks the comedy of their youth is the best era, right? And comedy doesn't last. Fawlty Towers is the earliest thing I find funny. Anything before that, I just don't really like the taboos and the kind of the release of social pressures just doesn't apply because I don't really understand because I wasn't growing up in that time.
But what about
and then as you get older, I can laugh.
Yes.
I find it funny because it's almost because it's so bad, but I kind of find it and I kind of appreciate it as part of our heritage. It's part of the kind of post-war British heritage, and it's Sid James is a funny character. I mean, it is funny, but it's kind of funny in a it's funny in a way that someone's farting is funny, right? I mean, it's It's intrinsically, or someone falling over. That's funny, but it's not like great. It's not like great wit, is it? It's not like amazing one-liners. So yeah, I mean, everyone tends to think, and then people who get older, they tend to have like sense of humor failures more and more. As you get older, you just don't find things funny because you just don't really, you're just not with it anymore. Everyone kind of dreads that a bit. But I do think something definitely has happened to comedy generally, in the sense that, the kind of period where there was a kind of freewheeling anything goes has definitely declined, has definitely gone a little bit, and there is much less freedom to make kind of jokes about. I mean, the Borat phenomenon was a good example of that. Borat's are very funny. But Borat kind of ironically basically used kind of old-fashioned like ethnic jokes. That's all it was. It just made fun of foreigners, which is very funny because foreigners are funny, right? But it's done under kind of like, oh, this is terrible, I'm laughing at that. But he was basically. He's basically an Arab, and he goes and meets loads of red state Americans, and the humor is in the kind of bigotry. But in the more recent one, all the kind of jokes were about like the little people. Like he's a protected comedian, right? He's a wealthy man. He can do whatever he likes. He could make jokes satirizing all the big taboos in America, but he never would. No one would, because your life would be made a nightmare by you wouldn't get work, and you just get thousands of messages of abuse. Another thing, like 20 Bonfire of Vanities, okay, not strictly comedy, but it's a satire. That was commissioned in 2014 by Amazon. It's a new TV series. No one has heard anything about it since. It just disappeared because like the jokes, the satire in that story, it would just be unsayable because it's too powerful. It's like making jokes about the Central Politburo Committee in like 1950s Russia. They've got all the power. You don't joke about them. And I think there is a certain amount of, there is a certain amount of authoritarianism in the culture now, and like kind of, I suppose, scolding. It's hard to say it without making it sound like you're saying that women are doing it, but it is a sort of more feminine, authoritarian kind of level of scolding, which makes it very hard. Comedians I know of someone, a presenter who had a comedian on, a comedian is talking on a show, make jokes about all sorts of things. But before the episode, he just said, whatever you say, whatever we talk about, do not ask me about the trans issue. And do not make me, like, I don't want to have to answer those questions. I don't want to have to define what a woman is. It's like, this is like the perfect material for comedy, isn't it? But it's not, because it's a genuine taboo. And like the religious authorities have genuine power to make your lives misery. So I think, I'm not sure what you can make about transsexuals or something, but the fact there's the certain issues are completely off the radar, basically.
Well, I mean, even on that, like, I suppose we could talk about a million different shows, but Little Britain, for instance, which I was always a big. Sorry,
I was going to say that's a classic example. That's been rapidly, the culture has changed so much since that came out, and that was probably, I guess, like the hype thing goes, right.
Those guys they did the full thing, so they were all in on I'm a Lady, and fat suits and fat women and fat women of color, which is in the third one. Like that's a hilarious sketch. When she says, "Oh, it's like the black hole of Calcutta," so they did all of that, and then they cut to now. And they have denounced themselves. They've put messages before it. They've deleted stuff. Well, I'm sure they're thinking of CGing it or something, getting rid of everything. They've done the full turning their back on it. I mean, actually, we asked someone else this recently. Ed, what do you think? Do you think that they should just stand their ground and say, "Oh, look, it was a different time, and you guys can just sort of just calm down, and it is what it is," and we wouldn't do it now, but we'll leave it? Or do you think that you have to do the other thing where you say, "I'm so sorry," and go down that route?
No. I mean, I don't think you should ever apologize unless you've. I mean, I can see why. Like David Baddiel feels bad about his sketches about Jason Lee, the footballer, who had the jokes about Pineapple Head. He had this hairstyle, and looking back, that seems a bit coarse and a bit crude. And even at the time, I think people thought, okay, maybe not the racial sensitivity, but people thought it was a bit mean and unpleasant. So where people have been a bit mean and unpleasant, I can see why. If it's stuff about identity stuff, so if there is like pressure to cave because it offends identity groups, I think you should never apologize. Really, I just generally think just tell them to get stuffed.
But also some of those sketches, Ed. Think about. I mean, it seems silly to talk about Little Britain, but like think about Andy and his carer. Like if I don't need to tell you why that's funny. Like those guys.
There's so much truth in that too. There's so much truth in that sketch.
There's a lot of truth, and they're the worst. Like those guys are the worst. Like you feel sorry for them, obviously in real life, but it's just inherently fun. There's so many, and even with the I'm a lady sketch, like they don't just want to be ladies; they want to be Victorian ladies, and it's ridiculous. Like it's totally ridiculous. And it's funny. And the moment we start to pull it apart, it's not funny. You know what I mean? Like that's I just don't get why people are intent on. I don't know. Like, just it seems like it's an anti-comedy movement. Like they're intent on never finding any of this funny and refusing that something is funny when it plainly is. Like all that stuff in Little Britain is still funny. It's not like the world has changed so much that I go like the two.
It's all subjective, though, isn't it? I mean, you can, like a lot of people, even at the time, like Little Britain wouldn't have been made a lot of the most cancelled comedies. It wouldn't have been made 30 years earlier. It was just too grotesque, and a lot of people thought it's too grotesque. I think a lot of it's quite grotesque, but I mean, the answer to that is okay. Just fine, just don't watch it. It was a bit out there, and my general things I always say is that there's always going to be some kind of moral authority, isn't there? There's always going to be some form of censorship. I just think it used to be kind of like the church or kind of the sort of general great society, general society forces who are sort of keen on morality patrolling, and now it's just sort of a bit more anarchic and decided by social media or decided by issues of identity. Like James Bond's James Bond, when his books came out and the novel and the films came out, that Paul Johnson condemned them for being too sexy and but now it's sexist. So I mean, there's inevitably going to be like you can't have a power vacuum of morality because someone's going to like to. I mean, my main complaint is I just think a lot of the morality controllers now are just basically mental, and there's no kind of coherence to what's right and wrong, and there's no and there's kind of no sound judgment. Where at least before censorship was abolished in '68, there were quite clear rules. Like the worst thing is when you don't have clear rules and things. That means nothing can get done, nothing can be made because no one is sure what's acceptable. So yeah, I think I get the impression comedians kind of live in this kind of state of like terror about what is going to get them in trouble with the most members of the crowd. It's definitely having a chin. I mean, I'm not like I don't have my fingers on the pulse of like comedy, so I don't know how how much this actually affects things on the ground. But my impression is it does a little bit.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult to be an up-and-coming comedian, I think, because you would be constantly walking on eggshells. I think if you're Dave Chappelle, you can kind of get away with it because you're so big, but
cancel culture doesn't really, it's like J.K. Rowling, she's okay, whatever, she's got £1 billion, whatever, and she's still selling hundreds of millions, but the next J.K. who's in their 20s wouldn't want to be so outspoken about those issues, would you? So yeah, I mean, as long as, Dave Chappelle's an interesting one because he kind of won, didn't he? Because I guess, in all these things, money talks, right? So if a company, whatever, has employees who are making a fuss about it, but then they have a star who's making loads of money, then that kind of wins. On this kind of maybe not, it's a bit of another segue, but I'm reading a book, Richard Hanani's story. It's like The Origins of Woke, and he's very interesting about how he goes through. And he said, he denies the cultural influence of these ideas. He says it's mostly basically just the law. So corporations are so vulnerable to being sued for things like sexism or racism if they don't basically clamp down on anyone making any comment at work. And secondly, they have to go out of their way to show they are on board with like progressive ideas because that will reduce the chance of them getting sued. So something like. You think so? Like Netflix, if some trans employees say, "Oh, you can't have Dave Chappelle," because they could potentially then have massive lawsuits against the company, saying, we were made to feel like in danger or something, and that's the thing that's actually causing the censorship thing. So it's all basically down to lawyers creating this environment. But as you say, if you I suppose as long as you're successful, then you can probably get away with it.
But it's a Squid Game. Like you've got to there's no opportunity where you can get up and, I don't know, like work your material and see what works and what doesn't. It's like, it's literally like, I've got, and the only stuff that's going to work is risky stuff. So you go, all right, well, I've got to bet the house every time I go up, and it could end up being a Michael Richards event or something, where I'm recorded.
Squid Game. Is it? I've never steeled myself to watch Squid Game yet. It's like really violent, right? It's like horrible, right? I mean, I'm not sure I can.
Yeah.
Will I get upset?
Well, no, it's very good. I must say, it is very good.
It is good.
It's proper drama.
My kids want to watch it. I thought maybe they're not quite. That's probably quite bad parenting. Although, I mean, I'm very tolerant about letting them watch violent stuff, but I don't believe it affects them. Hopefully, but apparently that's quite excessive, isn't it? Yeah. So sorry, what were we talking about? Comedy again? Sorry, I'm going to see.
Well, maybe we should talk about Blackadder, because you penned an article to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the British sitcom. And John and I, we both grew up watching this show on the ABC, which is our national broadcaster. Maybe for the benefit of some of our US listeners, Blackadder is a classic British sitcom created by Rowan Atkinson and Tony Curtis, who was responsible for 4 Weddings and a Funeral and Love Actually.
Richard Curtis.
Oh, sorry, Richard Curtis, of course. Yeah, I'm thinking of...
Tony Curtis is also a great man and is in a different sphere, but yeah.
Yes. Maybe I was thinking of Baldrick. Isn't his name Tony? What's his name?
Tony Robinson.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes. Well, it ran for 4 seasons through the 1980s, with each season being set in a different historical period. And now, if you haven't seen it, stop looking at memes and doom scrolling about trans stuff and get it done, because it is fantastic. So, Ed, what's your personal history with Blackadder?
Well, I remember it from I remember watching when I was 9. So when I was just about, I looked back on the Wikipedia to check it wasn't like another false memory that I've inserted into my head. But yeah, just around the 9 that the 3rd season came out, and I remember I was in new school and I didn't really know anyone. It was a bit kind of that weird feeling, and just talking to another guy in the playground who was also watching this amazing comedy show, and it just that kind of, I loved it so much, and that was season 3, the one set in the Regency period, which I think is my second favorite one, or maybe my favorite one. I'm not sure. So Blackadder is like the sort of it's a lot of it's about class, like a lot of British comedy is. So he's a sort of servant, he's the butler, but he has a sort of like servant underling, Baldrick, who's a complete imbecile, and then he has his boss, who's the Prince Regent, who's also a complete imbecile, but in a sort of posh way, who's played by Hugh Laurie, and it was just incredibly funny and incredible dry humour. Rowan Atkinson had this incredible way of doing put downs. And then, so the first season was slightly different. And the character was different. Like the Blackadder character wasn't this kind of cunning, arrogant figure from late. He's much more sort of Weasley and a bit of a loser. And interestingly, I learned later that they originally made him like he later was. So in the pilot, which was just put out around the time of the article, I think it's the 40th anniversary. But they decided to change it. So the first season's the first season definitely the weakest. It's got its fans. But then the second season came along, a much lower budget. Michael Grade, who's I think head of BBC Two, like, okay, we'll give it another chance. Much lower budget. And they brought in Ben Elton, who became the kind of co-writer with Curtis. And Ben Elton did a lot of stuff in the 80s. I mean, everyone in British comedy will know him. And and Blackadder 2 was incredibly funny. And that was set in the Tudor period. And he's just this kind of... He's just a frustrated guy. Like a lot of those great comedy characters. David Brent's classic one, Basil Fawlty as well, and also, Partridge to a certain extent. Just sort of frustrated people who feel that they should be higher up in the system than they are, and they like the system, and they're kind of quite conservative in that sense. They just think they should be at the top of it. As he goes through the series, Blackadder goes further and further down the sort of social class. So he goes from being a member of the royal family to an aristocrat to butler, and then finally in the final one, he's this captain in the army, a career captain in the British Army from the sort of late Victorian period, who now finds himself like facing like the Germans. It's just, it's absolutely terrifying. And it ends with this kind of incredibly poignant scene when they're about to go out to battle, and then the guns stop, and then one of them says, "Oh yeah, we survived it, the Great War, 1914 to 1917," and there's kind of like bitter laugh, and it's like, no, they're not, and they will have to go out, and you presume they're sort of all cut down and killed, which is a very, very poignant way to end, and it sort of ended there. And apparently, filming that scene was actually quite terrifying because they're using loads of firecrackers, and they're all generally quite scared when they made it, which is the secret of good acting, actually. From The Exorcist or something, made them really scared. But they've been talk about it since that they should make another one, and nothing's really happened. But I think it's just one of those things where it's just good to end. Like The Office was like that. The Office ended in such perfect way. 2 series and then a special, and it was just. And 40 Towers ended after 2 series, and sometimes that kind of just makes it so much more of a work of art than something that just kind of drags out a little bit.
I feel like the end, just on because we talked about the difference between the US and the UK, and for me, look, it's horses for courses, and we love American comedy, of course we do. But one thing you don't get, generally speaking, is pathos, and there's something about that ending of Blackadder, or for me, the ending of The Office isn't the special. The ending is the ending of season 2. That is the real ending. When he said, like, that is the ending. She says no to Tim. And we end with Brent's line about Dolly Parton. That's the end of the show. Really, the other stuff's a bonus.
So, do you think the Christmas special basically was a sop? The sentimentality
Yes.
It should have ended in the traditional British.
Of course, I love it.
Sadness.
I love to weep about it. I think it's beautiful. It's beautifully done. But the genius, the diamond pointed genius of ending at season 2. Like that, and that's ultimate. That is just like it has so much integrity, and that's the same with Blackadder. Like that, when they do that big push, you just go, "Is it like?" I mean, Ricky, we've talked about this. There's part of you that wonders if it's a joke. You're like, "Is this a joke? Like, is this? Am I being pranked here?" And then you go, "No, this is really the end of the show." Like, oh my god! And
They can't end it like this. They can't end it like this. This is just horrible. And then no, that's the way it ends.
Yes, there's so much money involved that it's a gravy train. They just have to push the series forward. Even sitcoms like John and I were talking about Spin City not that long ago, and so Michael J. Fox leaves the show and they get Charlie Sheen. And in 2.5 Men, Charlie Sheen he leaves and they bring someone else in as well. Like Ashton Kutcher. So I guess because there's so much money involved and the stakes are much higher, they just want to milk that thing.
Yeah, bigger writing team. I mean, British one will have like 2 or 3 writers, and they'll have like a whole, big room full of them. So I suppose if there's a couple of writers writing a series, they can't really. They run out of material and run out of humor eventually, don't they? I mean, I found out a Peep Show a little bit. I think by season 9 or something, it was just so depressing. Like nothing good was happening to Mark's life. There was sometimes in the original, in the first few, sometimes it'd end on a winner, but it was just. Increasingly
they're getting older, and they're not. You want them to start having a family and stuff. You're like, all right, this is getting sad now. You guys, the old dude brothers need to grow up or whatever.
Yeah. It's like you're just 2 guys in their 40s living in Croydon. And it's just like this is just so bleak. This is unbearable.
But with Blackadder, what really struck us when we were watching it this time was that it seemed like it was written by very smart men. What happened to this breed of like obsessive, educated, visionary comedy writer? Are they allowed at the BBC anymore?
I think. Well, I don't know. I mean, I know the BBC is like losing a lot. I know in the podcasting game, it's kind of starting to lose to smaller companies. I mean, especially Gary Lineker's company. Because I mean, some for sort of political reasons, like to do with diversity. Like a lot of popular podcasts. Often involved like 2 men, for example, and they might happen to be 2 white men. They might happen to be 2 public school educated white men.
Let's not get personal. All right.
Just another 2 white men doing a podcast. No, but I mean, and those tend to work because the dynamic and the banter it like works. And so the rest of history would not have been commissioned. Okay, it's not a comedy show, but it's very funny and it's very learned, and sorry, I'm just pronouncing it like Homer Simpson there, learned. But the BBC can't produce that. They couldn't commission 2 public school educated white guys to do a podcast. They just wouldn't be allowed because they have to sort of tick certain boxes. I don't know how much that applies to comedy writing generally. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's still. I mean, presumably, I mean, America is the place to go, isn't it? That's where the succession right. The succession rights is, for example.
Mm.
I mean, I think where there's money, they will always attract very, very talented, kind of very determined people who are good at it. Basically.
Well, Blackadder was started by two guys that met at university, and they were just pretty much interested in comedy. And the idea that two friends would approach the BBC out of the blue and pitch a show and be given a chance just seems unimaginable to me today. It's it's what you said. It's all that diversity stuff. They'd get a team of diverse people together, and then they'd get them to make a show.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, now you just start. Now you go on Spotify, wouldn't you? And you might. I mean, if you're good, you'd probably still make it. But I mean, there are definitely institutional hurdles in. I mean, politics definitely plays a part, I think, in comedy, just because it's so much about the sort of dynamic of the people. And in Britain, it was, British comedy. So there was kind of a lot of the stand-up musical tradition in Britain was kind of quite a working class thing. But then in that kind of era in the 70s and 80s, it became, it was starting in the 60s, really. Footlights, it becomes very dominated by Oxford and Cambridge. People like the Cambridge Footlights. I mean, if that kind of career had been open to more people, I don't know. I mean, there might have been lots of untapped people from different backgrounds who might have even done a better job. I don't know. I mean, it does seem strange that so much of the comedy from the 80s did come from this group who went to Cambridge together. Or Oxford. I think Oxford in the case of Rowan Atkinson and Richard Curtis.
Well, I mean, there's lots that occurred to us in this last viewing. Like any sitcom, the show's got a range of things that are completely forbidden now. Mostly male cast, obviously. Cross-dressing as nuns in one scene. Bawdy humour, gay panic, making fun of people's accents, which happens a lot. Surely we can reach an equilibrium where we can enjoy all of these things again. Because, like, for example, even just take the accents. Like, accents are funny. And, like, mispronouncing stuff and whatever is funny. I mean, I know, there are obviously certain, like, because it's very political now, you've got to pick your target. But generally speaking, all of this stuff is it's not like all of this stuff is completely not funny anymore.
No, accents will always be funny. But yeah, you just have to. It's just like be careful what kind of company you're making these kind of. I don't think we're ever gonna reach a point where it's acceptable to joke about these things. To be honest, I mean that sounds very pessimistic. I think we've got a good 40 or 50 years of like
drudgery.
There'll be humor on like podcasts. It's not going to be on sort of mainstream TV. It's not going to be on in any kind of central forum. It's not going to be acceptable to joke about things again. I don't think in a serious way. I don't know. I mean, but again, maybe the market will put more. If someone's makes money for people, then maybe it'll work like David Chappelle. But generally, I'm pessimistic.
I think the brilliance of Blackadder is that it has many layers, and in preparation for our talk today, I actually rewatched Blackadder. It's been quite a while for me, and I think I watched it as a young teen, and I knew nothing of history, but I could laugh at Baldrick and Hugh Laurie because they were buffoons. And as an adult, I'm appreciating more and more the history in the show, but also Blackadder's situation. I mean, he's desperately trying to climb that social ladder and is just sandwiched between two buffoons. Do you think that multi-layered comedy is part of its enduring appeal?
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of the best comedy does work on different levels. I mean, The Simpsons I mentioned before is the obvious example. Children will find it funny because Homer gets hit on the head, but it also has lots of like very, very funny satire and very, very good lines, and it makes fun of a lot of things in society and the family, which are very clever. I mean, The Simpsons again is another victim of the kind of the change in comedy. They had to get rid of the Indian character because that's somehow offensive, but
because an Indian never ran a Quickie Mart in history.
Yeah, and it's just that's a stereotype. I mean, I also wonder would The Simpsons be made because would Homer just not be a kind of lovable figure to a lot of Americans anymore because he's kind of.
But isn't it? Aren't we being selective as well? I mean, because and people are going to some of our listeners will be like, oh, like because we're getting butthurt about this, but when you think about Homer being a complete moron and being a terrible father and being the butt of everyone's jokes, like the idea of fathers, like, idiot fathers, it really does stick out to you more and more once you have a kid, that you go, oh wow, like really, like so, why are we so deeply offended by like, well, maybe you should just cancel the show, like, you know what I mean? Like, if we're so deeply offended by Apu the Quickie Mart guy, and then we're just going to let Homer be the biggest idiot in the world, like the ultimate idiot dad, and everyone go, oh, dads are such idiots, you know what I mean?
Well, but I suppose you're lower down the totem pole, aren't you? So it's a bit, is that even a hard phrase?
Says it quite.
I don't know. I had a friend who hated, like, Peppa Pig. He hated Daddy Pig because he just says, like, he besmirches like dads everywhere because he's just such a cretin.
Is he a simp, the dad in Peppa Pig?
No, he's just an idiot. I mean, he's almost like he's quite like almost like a British Homer Simpson. He's just a complete cretin. He gets everything wrong. He always must. I watched a lot of Peppa Pig, and I've been to Peppa Pig World. I mean, just with children, obviously. He always like electrocutes himself because doing the DIY and stuff like that. He's just a kind of cretinous, stupid dad, and obviously, like the women characters are clever. But I don't want to. I'm not like texturing and analysing Peppa Pig here. But I mean, I think all those kind of archetypes are like legitimate targets. I mean, they're all kind of, the stupid dad or the Indian Quickie Mart thing. I think there's comedies like about telling truths, right? And if certain kind of patterns and archetypes in society are just kind of completely impossible to talk about or even mention, then it's not going to be. It might be like approved comedy, but it's just not going to be very interesting. It's not going to like target hard, like the sense of relief you get for comedy when someone tells a joke which you're kind of all thinking.
But there's a bit in the first Blackadder where Edmund is being married off to a short, stout, homely, and horny Spanish woman with a mustache, which is a universal horror for everyone, like being trapped into a betrothed into a terrible, marriage like that. Look, it's not nice, it's not polite, but isn't it true? And isn't it also exactly what Edmund deserves? And on another level, I love Miriam Margolyes, and I think she gets the joke as well.
No, it's great. And Jim Broadbent as the translator, who's Italian. That has everything. That's kind of sexual, oversexed, unattractive women and foreigners with funny accents. I mean, that is, comedy is not necessarily moral, is it? So there's always been that kind of conflict between the moral authorities and comedians. They've always got in trouble. I just think today is just a different kind of moral authority, isn't it?
Well, they've recently slapped a language warning on the start of Blackadder episodes, which I'm surprised at. Rewatching Blackadder, I don't think it's quite as offensive as, say, Little Britain or
much less.
Or even
gentle, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. So I'm surprised that they've done that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I suppose maybe it's because people with foreign accents. There's like a Spanish torturer in Blackadder 2, isn't there? But Germans in Blackadder 4, but you can kind of make fun of Germans.
I mean, it's legendary. The accent stuff in it's legendary. I've been saying for decades now, many apologies.
Yeah. That's like.
Yes, all of the stuff, all of those great mispronunciations are perfect. I wouldn't change a thing,
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it's amazing. I actually saw Rowan Atkinson on the street about 6 months ago. I didn't say anything to him. There's no anecdote there. I wouldn't want to go up to him and bother him. He's, And also, what if he was horrible to me? I would just be crushed. What if he turned out to be a horrible guy? Yes. I mean, I'd be broken.
You should never meet your heroes.
Absolutely.
What are you going to say as well? What are you going to say? Like, you're just like, oh, I love your work, and
So, all right, or just shout at him a line from one of his comedies. He'll just say,
yes, yeah.
I mean, goodness. Well, actually, just before we start wrapping up, we should get your take on, because you've read a lot of history. What is your read on the history in Blackadder? Because this is something that's come to us really late. Like we didn't know about history much, and then we've watched Blackadder now, and we've gone, oh, I'm embarrassed. There's so much English history in here. Are they good at history?
But obviously, they have to use a lot of poetic license. The first one is all kind of nonsense because it doesn't really make any sense. So I mean, like, it's based on like Richard III being succeeded by his nephew becomes Richard IV, who's then is like Brian Blessed, isn't he? Obviously, I mean, he was 10 at the time, so it doesn't make any sense. Blackadder 3, I mean, they take quite a few figures who are slightly historically disjoined, but they have to. Like Dr. Johnson was a bit earlier than, and they also, feature French revolutionaries, even though, it's supposed to be set in the Regency period, which is 1811 to 1811. It's a bit of a jumble, but I don't think it, really matters. They're all people from that kind of known era. And, same with Elizabethan. I don't think they really take any liberties with Elizabethan. Obviously, the most interesting and controversial one is the First of War, because it's much like rawer topic and a much more controversial one. And, the Blackadder has often been, there's the Blackadder version of the First of War. I mean, I guess Australia must have the same kind of, obviously, the First of War is arguably even a big, like Aurora, a more traumatic event in Australia, because I suppose but also, I suppose, more kind of nation forming. But, huge numbers dead, and the Blackadder version is that it was all kind of pointless for no reason. It was all just generals, sending thousands of men to the slaughter for like tiny bits of mud. And there's obviously, and that was cited by a historian called Gary Sheffield of Forgotten Victory, who said actually the First War was worth fighting, and the British Army actually did really well, and they weren't wasted. I mean, I tend to think that the Blackadder thing probably does have quite a lot of truth in it. That it really wasn't worth fighting the war, and it was. I don't know. It must have. I don't think for the men at the time they felt that. So obviously, Blackadder's cynicism is kind of anachronistic, because I don't think that many people at the time, there weren't any like mutinies in the British Army, and it was only in like the late 20s that people started thinking that. That's a kind of modern interpretation, but it was like a horrific, absolutely horrific thing to endure, and in that sense, like the ultimate case, a lot of comedy is like where you're trapped in a situation you can't get out, and the trenches are like the ultimate trap thing. There's literally no way out for you except by death, or if you're lucky, injury. So yeah, I just think it was a very like bold and clever thing for them to do. And like I mentioned the piece, Ben Elton's uncle, Geoffrey Elton's like a famous historian who he consulted. He said, "Can you watch this? Can you read it first?" And he says he won. His uncle's actually quite conservative. Like Ben Elton's like famously kind of like anti-Thatcher, kind of lefty. And he said his uncle was kind of won over and thought kind of the comedy worked, which is nice. But yeah, it's just a great show.
What's your favourite season?
I think 2 is kind of technically the wittiest. I think 3 is very. I like 3 as well, and I think I'd put those two almost together. 4 is not. I just think 4, the humour is slightly starting to wear out, but it was still funny. I mean, I think 1 is the weakest, just because like his character's so weird and Weasley and like pathetic.
It's terrifying,
it had its moments.
well, bloody and awful. Scared the pants off me when I was a kid. Peter Cook actually scares me, whatever he's in. Really.
Yeah. He is quite. Yeah. Remember, he was in Supergirl, wasn't he? He turned up in all sorts of things.
Yes, I was going to say that, Ed, is a deep cut, and I didn't want to say Supergirl just in case you hadn't seen it. You have seen it, and much props to you.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. I remember watching. I must have watched it a couple of times, but yeah, I've just completely not thought.
Boyfriend, creepy English boyfriend.
Right. Watch that and see what it's about. But yeah, he was a kind of like funny looking guy. But I think that because by being in it, he anointed the show. It was like in the apostolic succession of British comedy. Peter Cook, this kind of legend of the 60s and 70s, having this kind of brief moment before he's accidentally killed. Yeah, it was. I mean, I only watched 1 later because it wasn't really. I mean, obviously, in those days, you had to wait for something to be on television when you grew up in the 80s and 90s. So, trying to explain to my kids, you can't just find it and instantly buy it or something. And I think they did 1 later. But yeah, I mean, that was great. I mean, it was great that they gave it a shot, which I'm not sure in the Netflix era you would have. I mean, if you have like a failure, that's it. Well, sometimes it's worth picking out, isn't it? And something can turn out to be a real gem.
Yeah. Well, that first season is almost a different show, really.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is basically, isn't it? Completely.
Well, Ed, we're fast running out of time, but we do have a final question that we ask all our guests, and we'd like to know what you're reading right now.
Well, I actually have a terrible habit of reading like several books at the same time. I don't know if other people do that. But I always
Everyone on
go
this
back. What?
podcast says the same thing, Ed. You're not alone.
Yes, yeah.
Most of our guests say, I've got 10 books on the go, so you're in good company.
Yeah, I'm about the same. And some I just think I mentioned Richard Hanani's book. I mean, that's worth reading because I'm going to write something about it. It's interesting, and that's about the origins work. I've also been reading over holiday a book on the conquistadores. I can't remember the name of the authors. Oh, actually, it's actually underneath my laptop. That's where it is. Fernando Cervantes. Really interesting. I didn't really know anything about Latin America. I mean, I'm in my area of it, but it's just an amazing story of this absolute mind-blowing clash of cultures, and these kind of insanely brave Spanish sailors and explorers who just turned up in these jungles and often went missing and came back looking kind of bedraggled and insane. And then they went to this incredible city, which must have been as big as anything you saw, and they were literally like priests covered in blood, like cutting out people's hearts, and like hundreds of hearts in this kind of human sacrifice. It's just like Apocalypto. It's like that film seems to capture it so well. It's such a great film. And that was really fun reading.
That situation sounds terrible, but I think what's way worse is when people like misgender other people, and that's way worse.
That's literally shaking. Literally shaking.
That's right. Just a final word, Ed. We've spoken about a lot of different cool stuff today, and because I really see your writing is quite unique in that you do bring humor into your work, and I know you sell us this idea that of pessimism, being on the wrong side of history and whatnot. But I think that's just a cover. I think it's a filthy cover for your romantic heart, and I think you want us to laugh again and to love again and to be doing it all. What do you think? What do you think of my theory?
Interesting theory, Dr. Freud. I'll think about it. Yeah, I am a romantic, and yes, I do have this pessimistic side. But yeah, I mean, I think without humor or without laughing at things, life would be unbearable. And we'd also, even though things are terrible, and I always think, the other side's all terrible. I always worry, it's like if I lost my humor and just become like this kind of boring, ideological, obsessive, that would just be awful. You got to laugh about things, and I don't know, that just makes us human, right?
Well, I'll give you some personal info. I worked at a place recently, and at least one of them's going to listen to this maybe and report back. Who knows? But they are all like ideologues, and they don't laugh. And there was no talk of. I had an existential crisis. Like it was really
no ban.
It was really tough.
That'd be awful. I mean, that would actually be awful, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so I think I hold out hope that the laughter will return soon.
Let's all hope for that. I mean, obviously, Mr. Pessimist, I probably think it won't, but good luck anyway.
Well, we encourage everybody to check out your Substack, which is On the Wrong Side of History.
Thank you so much.
And how can they find you online, Eddie, on Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. Just Ed West. Very easy to find. Which some complete stranger called Ed West gave to me years ago, which is very nice. An American just said, I only have 200 followers, you can have mine. I had some, obscure, long-winded one before. So yeah, Ed West on Twitter, and then you should be able to find my Substack there.
Thanks so much, Ed.
It's been a pleasure. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the New Flesh podcast. If you like our work, please consider rating us on Apple Podcasts or even writing us a review. It really does help the show reach a wider audience. We'll be back with another episode next week. Until then, long live the New Flesh.